Welcome to the Land of Confusion. This is our second science fiction panel. And today, I'm Dave March, your host today. And today we also have returning to us Arahant.
Hello.
And two new guests, Hank Rohde, or so it seems, and Lyndon Cheng, or LC, as she goes on Ricochet. So we were just, I know that Randy insisted we all get together and talk about things, but he didn't, he was so focused on getting us together to actually talk. He didn't seem to actually come up with any kind of agenda for us to talk about. So I know that Hank's just been telling me he's been reading Dune. I take it everyone's at least here read the first book.
Nope.
Oh, wow, okay.
Wow, that is a wow.
That one never interested me much.
Okay. Any particular reason?
I had a thing, always had a thing about reading stuff that was too popular. If it was too popular, there had to be something wrong with it. It's like when the Star Wars movies came out, I didn't go see them.
Yeah, I had the Harry Potter came out when I was exactly the wrong age. I have still not read that series.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've seen precisely one movie, never read any of the books. My ex-girlfriend is like, well, you have to read all these books. I'm like, no, she's my ex-girlfriend.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with, I'm like the same age that Harry was when like the book ended, essentially. So I definitely grew up with the Harry Potter series, like most people my age.
Well, I'm much older, but I actually did read the whole Harry Potter series. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it still stands up really well. But I imagine there's going to be quite a Dune resurgence with the movie coming out later in the year. Well, assuming that it comes out later this year.
I mean, there may be, but they haven't done a good job with Dune movies before, and they don't even have Sting for this one.
I mean, I like the director that is doing this, so I have some faith in him. I really like Blade Runner 2049. I thought that was actually like really cool. And like Sicario was a really
Sicario's a great movie.
So he's made like very, I mean, he's, like most sci-fi directors, Dune is a huge part of like why they started to like sci-fi. You can tell that by what he's said about Dune. But as far as I can tell, this movie's only the first half. So if it doesn't work out, I guess we just get half a story.
Yeah, it also has the problem that half the book is great visuals, right? Riding sandworms in the desert, knife fights, stuff like that. But the other half is devious scheming and wheels within wheels and feints within feints, and that is much harder to put up on the silver screen.
The other problem I've always thought with it, and it's hard to really translate, is all the religious stuff that's going on in the books.
Yeah, right.
And like that's just not something that you really have, like, it kind of gets dropped, which is usually pretty good in my regard. But it's all about creating like the actual Messiah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think it's supposed to be based off of the rise of Islam and the Byzantine Empire, but I really don't know enough about history in that regard to actually say any more about that.
See, that I know that part. I just don't know the Dune part.
Yeah, I actually recently reread it up till God Emperor, and then I started reading the Expanse, and that's like expanded everywhere. It's like really long, right? So I haven't gone back to finish the original Dune series, but I would be impressed if we ever get like a cinematic adaptation all the way to the end of that first story to the end of God Emperor, because that really tells the whole story of the Golden Path.
Oh yeah, that'd be.
Yeah, but God Emperor is a weird book. Yeah.
I've only read up to Messiah, and then I saw the sci-fi series, which went up to Children of Dune.
Right. Yeah. Dune and Dune Messiah, I still think should have just been one book. Dune Messiah felt like a really long epilogue to me.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. But I really like Children of Doom. I thought the sci-fi miniseries was good too.
I think Messiah was designed basically. I don't think he ever intended to come back to Dune, Frank Herbert, that is, and that it kind of is like the Jaws 2 of the series. And then once he got through it, and he's like, you know what, I can really make some money off of this, and I have some ideas I want to explore. And then you got the rest of everything up to Chapter House. So do we have any other weird science fiction writers we'd like to talk about? Because, or at least that series seemed to be a little out there. Do we have anything else?
So real quick before we leave Dune entirely, and this is contra Arahant's statement it being too popular. When I was growing up, I was growing up younger than Arahant, so it was not at all popular. So I was definitely the weird kid reading this book that nobody else cares about. So I did not run into that. But rereading it again, I came across, he does quotes at the top of the chapters from various characters. And one of those late in the first book is deep within the human unconscious is a fundamental need for a universe that makes sense. But the universe is always one step beyond logic. And I look at that and I think, that seems familiar. Why does that seem familiar? Oh yeah, it was my senior yearbook quote. Well, that's odd.
Well, I was telling these two earlier about your first appearance on Land of Confusion there, Arahant, where you wrote that story up for me and Don.
Oh, yes. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think of another like really out there science fiction stories out there, but we were talking earlier about The Expanse. Has everyone seen some of The Expanse?
Some of it.
Closest I come is I've listened to some of the Legendarium podcast where they've covered The Expanse. So,
well,
I just started book 7, and it's like, one of those things where these books are enormous, right? And it's it's obviously a very large universe, and it keeps expanding, as in its name. It's actually one of the few times where I actually think sometimes the show handles things better than the books.
Yeah, that's.
Just
I have not read the books, but the people have told me it sounds like the show is a bit more fast-paced in the books.
Oh yeah, it is. But the problem with some of the books is it's very point of view based. So every book you follow 5 or 6 point of views. But some of the books you follow extremely boring point of views, right? It's like, I don't care about this person. So you don't have that problem in the show, right? So yeah, there are definitely slogs in some of the earlier books.
So
Like,
it truly is the Game of Thrones of science fiction.
Yeah. So yeah, you have some it's very funny when you go from like a really good point of view character like Avzarala, and then you go to someone, you're like, no one's gonna remember this person, Yeah, so it has that problem. And but otherwise, I mean, I think it adapted it really, really well. Yeah, it's obviously more fast paced, but next season's the last season, and it's not going to be the end of the series. Like book wise, I don't know what Amazon's planning, but I think it only goes up to this book, and that's it. So I don't know if they're going to do like a spin-off series afterwards.
My understanding is these shows just increase in cost over time, and at a certain point, you're just bound to like say, we're not making enough money to justify everyone's raises every year, so the end of the series.
Well, there's actually there's a time jump, like a pretty big time jump in this story. So there's actually a good ending, like if you want to just end the story there, and I think that's probably what they're gonna do.
Okay. Do we have any? I'm thinking like Silver Age, Golden Age is a science fiction. So does anyone? I guess everyone here read any Heinlein?
Yes.
What's
Not
our
quite
favorite
all of it.
Heinlein story?
I'm deciding between Have Spacesuit Will Travel and Starship Troopers here.
Yeah, Starship Troopers. Yeah.
Trying to remember one, the main character is or sort of main character is a kid called Thorby. Does that ring any bells? It's one of the juveniles, I think, but it's just
Yes, but not
it's
loud
been a
enough that
long time.
that I can. They ring bells, but not loud enough that I can remember the name of the story.
Yeah, well, his real name is Thor Bradley something the third, and he's really the son or really grandson of a big industrialist, and he's been stolen and sold into slavery by some other member of the family trying to take over the business.
Citizen of the Galaxy.
That's the one.
Good book.
Yeah. Of course, the main thing was the real main character, in my opinion, was his mentor, who was a spy.
Mhm.
That's something that Heinlein does often, is the eidetic perfect memory thing. That always seems a bit odd, but he seems to check that box in at least half of his stories. In that one, it was some sort of mental technique that let you just memorize things exactly.
Right.
Yeah, mine. I'm torn between, like, Starship Troopers. I think is pretty much a great one. There's another one where this guy is brought in to be the body double of, like, the Imperial Prime Minister of the solar system, and eventually has to the prime minister dies, and he has to take over his life, and then the end of the book is him saying, well, I don't even really remember who I used to be. Now I'm actually the prime minister that I've person. Like, okay, that was a little weird.
Sounds like that might have been the basis for the movie Dave many years ago.
Oh yeah, that's one of my favorite political movies for some reason. I can't imagine. Once caught a fish this big. Another one he has these ones where he's writing, like, he's always writing books where it's kind of like his utopian idea, not just Starship Troopers. I'm just remembering one where it's the family is all, the nuclear war starts, the family all gets into the nuclear bunker. They wake up, or they come outside a short while later and find the world has been tossed upside down, and he has these weird conversations with his son, who's always, like, rebelling against whatever, like, authority the father is trying to bring down. It's like, what is this?
Is that Farnham's Freeholds?
That is Farnham's Freehold. And then it gets really weird.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he was an interesting dude. He had a lot of interesting philosophies.
That was actually true of a lot of the old science fiction writers. You look at stuff by Robert Silverberg, like the one character who's going back through time to seduce all of his female ancestors.
That sounds right.
Or who was the other one I was just thinking of? It was another one where it was like, what? Oh, Philip Jose Farmer. Oh man, that guy's got some good ones.
Don't think I've read any of his.
No, really? Okay.
I've heard the name. I might have read short stories in an anthology, but I definitely don't remember anything specific.
I haven't.
Yeah, he had a lot of fun with various characters like Tarzan. He borrowed Tarzan and wrote a few books about that, but it was in a very different context, if you will. That there was actually this group of immortals who they were immortal because of some kind of brew they took every year or something, and they were actually descended from, like, Neanderthals and what have you, which we know we all are now.
Yeah.
but that's another story.
Mhm.
So they had this gathering every year, and there would be, if one of the eldest of them, I mean, they weren't truly immortal, but so if one of the, I think they called themselves the Nine, died, then they would have to have uh, a fight basically for that position, that seat on the board.
Mm.
And so the Tarzan character, and then a Doc Savage type character called Doc Caliban was, wound up in a fight together for it. And, it was drug fueled, what have you. But that one gets pretty weird. But another one he had was a version of Around the World in 80 Days. And one of the things that he did at the very end, he says, now, you may think that this is nothing at all, and that there is no such situation like this, because again, it dealt with immortality or relative immortality. But I would point out to you that the author's initials are PF, like in Phileas Fogg.
Oh.
Yeah.
So the old ones were a lot of fun.
Okay. What other things? Something. Yeah. So, how about A. Bertram Chandler? Anyone here read those stories?
Oh yes, Australian author.
Never knew that. I just remember his encountering his science fiction in college and being kind of struck by some of the stories that he was writing.
Yeah, trying to think of the name of his main character. Do you remember, Dave?
It's Commodore something or other, of course.
Something Grimes, I think.
Yes. And so just the initial adventures when he's like the mutineer story that starts off his career seems to be a little out of the way, but basically he's a space ensign on his way to his first big assignment, and the ship he is on is decided to defect to the other side. So he's trying to sabotage at all costs, and like different people are like, "Kid, you're just not that cool. Come on."
Yeah, John Grimes, I'm fairly sure. Anyway, the thing about that though is that Grimes is very much modeled on the captain of the Bounty.
Oh, really?
Yeah, what was now I'm losing his name, Bligh.
Yeah.
And in fact, Bligh later became a governor in Australia of one of the colonies in Australia. And of course, John Grimes also becomes a governor and, has the overthrow same way. So it's very much modeled on Bligh.
Okay. That does explain some things.
Mm-hmm.
I remember the story where his crew is required to carry this like space bee queen, and suddenly when they finally get to it hatches early and basically dominates all the males on the crew to be her slaves and servants. And when they finally get to the world they're supposed to be going to, like all the humans are like, "What is wrong with these people?"
Yeah, he had a lot of adventures in that series. He also had others like it had Amphilos in the title. I don't remember, Dawn of the Amphilos or something like that. But so there were other books that were outside the series. One of the things about Chandler was he actually was a merchant sea captain. So, the idea of going from planet to planet wasn't much different than from port to port on the sea.
Right.
So he had a lot of experience with that.
Sure.
So Hank, who's your favorite Golden Age writer?
Heinlein. I mean, that's obvious, but it's still correct.
Do you have any other story from one of his novels we should be talking about?
Well, I've got nothing immediately.
What about Moon is a Harsh Mistress? I've never actually read that one.
It's been a while for me.
Mm.
It did sort of read like if you're going to plan a revolution, have an omniscient computer as your friend, as the basic basic advice that you get from it. But it was a very interesting story.
What about you, LC? What do you have a Highland novel we think we haven't covered yet?
I don't think so. I think you were talking about Double Star earlier, right?
I think that was it.
I think that's what it was called. Yeah, I mean that one's really good, and I think it's pretty underrated. They don't really hear people talking about it a lot, but that's really good.
Okay. Any other? Okay. Who's the novelist we should be talking about? Arahant?
H. Beam Piper, always.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I'm always going to return to that. He was very good. He was libertarian, basically, or classical liberal, if you prefer, and very much Second Amendment type. Loved arms, and just wrote some very good stuff. In his short stories, a lot of times they would have a twist. Like one of them was called "He Walked Around the Horses." And there were some details that he didn't have quite right with reality, but the basic idea was that there was an English diplomat who had been going through Prussia at during the Napoleonic Wars, and he walked around the horses and disappeared, and so this took it to the universe he appeared in. The reality is someone knocked him on the head and buried him under a door lintel, but that's another story.
Right.
But this is an epistolary story. It goes all kinds of letters. Okay, here's the testimony of someone who was in the inn yard. Here's this person's testimony, etc. So it's all done as letters, and then letters from people to other people in the government of Britain to the government of Prussia. And one of these, of course, is the person who is the ambassador to Prussia from Britain. And this guy goes through, this is very interesting what all these papers show, but, it's just crazy. And the one person we never figured out is this Wellington guy. I have no idea who he is, although he sounds like an interesting fellow. And then, of course, it's signed Arthur Wellesley, who in our universe became Wellington. So he's got a lot of little historical twists like that, and has a lot of fun with it.
Yeah. Isn't he the one who killed himself because Goldwater lost the election?
Yep. There was more to it than that, but yeah, it was just shortly after the election, and he just figured, nope, we're going downhill. Might as well get out while I can.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, I think Piper took that man walking around the horses, which is a real incident as far as it goes. An actual diplomat walked around the horses and completely disappeared as far as history is concerned. I think he took that and he extrapolated that into his whole extra dimensional, at least in one series of stories, he had a dimension hopping organization.
Yeah, Paratime series.
Yeah. Which is
actually, I think the Paratime series started before he walked around the horses. So he fit that incident into his Paratime series rather than made the Paratime series based off of that.
Well, yeah, but the actual incident happened beforehand. So I think.
Oh yeah, well the incident happens back. The actual incident happens in like the 19th century.
Right. Yeah, 1809.
Yeah.
So I guess this is a leap on my part, but I'm sort of assuming that he heard about that and thought about that, and that's what generated the Paratime stories, and he eventually worked that incident into his stories.
again, could have been either way. He was very much into Fortean phenomenon. So it wasn't just that particular story he was looking at. A lot of the paratime stuff, he actually was explaining UFOs. He was just explaining several other things when you go through them and see what, he was doing. So,
Sure.
and, personally, I grew up, my mother subscribed to Fate magazine. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that.
No.
Well, it concentrated on Fortean phenomenon. My Proof of Survival, or other things like that, all sorts of ghost stories and stories about misplaced things, or things disappearing, things appearing out of nowhere, sort of like the Man of Torrid, which is pure BS, but you might have encountered that on the internet.
In the game Atom RPG, this is a video game I've been playing. It's sort of a Russian play on the old Fallout games.
Oh yes.
But in the sewers under Dead City, you meet a woman who buys artifacts like that, things which can't exist. So in the timeline of the game, there's a nuclear war in 1985. So you're in the old Soviet Union, which never actually collapsed, at least before the war. But at one point, you find a coin from the Russian Federation, which obviously can't exist in that universe. So you find a couple of these things and you sell them to a lady, and then someone comes by and assassinates the lady off camera, and that's all you ever learn about that. I think they're going to take that up in a sequel sooner or later, but I don't know. That's all you get.
I like it.
Reminds me of a sci-fi short story I read in one of those, There Will Be Wars. Basically, it's like set 20 years after a nuclear war, after the Cuban Missile Crisis went crazy, and the survivors are just in this, a bunch of people living in this small town are getting ready for the Jubilee, which is kind of like the celebration of things. And then there's stuff starts happening, and turns out they're getting like detritus from another dimension where the nuclear war is going hot, but it's set in the 80s. So their guy finds like a credit card, he finds like a newspaper from 1985, which is the same time, but it's like talking about the talks between Gorbachev and Reagan breaking down, and he's like, what is this?
That's kind of interesting with the cross pollination, if you will. But it reminds me of another series, and the name Lammer is coming up to my head, but I'm not sure whether it was his or not. The main character in the series was Brion Bayard. And again, it was another series like Paratime, where there are all these parallel universes that they can travel across. Excuse me. But a lot of them are an area known as the Blight, where all these nuclear wars have happened. And so there are only a few small individual universes out of the Blight where the nuclear wars haven't happened. And so they're known as Blight Insular, number 1, Blight Insular number 2, etc. Yeah, and so Brion Bayard, the main character, is basically kidnapped from one of them where he exists to be used as a replacement for the ruler of one of the other Blight Insular worlds, where it turned out that Brion Bayard had wound up ruling the world. And so except the only problem is that the one that's ruling the world had his legs blown off.
Oh, that's
so the Bayard from our world, or something like it, is being used, and some other people decide, yeah, we could use him, and then they start looking at sawing off his legs and what have you. Obviously he gets past that, but that whole Blight Insular thing kind of reminds me of what you're talking about with these other worlds where things kind of leak through.
Right.
And there were several stories in that series, and I Keith Laumer's name is coming up, but I don't know that he actually wrote them. It was probably someone else.
Yeah, because Keith Laumer is, of course, the guy behind the Bolo series. I see no one knows what I'm talking about.
No, I know what you're talking about.
I haven't read it, but I have read, I think, the David Weber tribute to it, so I got enough.
Yeah. The great, basically in Bolos, basically, the world, giant battle tanks like Ogre, if anyone's familiar with that miniature game, basically are running around the world. And they're all programmed with basically the personality of a British regimental sergeant major. So when they power up, they're all like, we have the honor of being, I'm the 48th Bolo this name. I'm part of this regiment that traces back to the 12th Argyle Scots back on Earth, and willing to do whatever is necessary to keep human life going. It's like, and so it's a good way to solve the problem of artificial intelligence, I found.
Mm-hmm. It actually is Keith Laumer. It's Worlds of the Imperium.
Okay.
Series.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of his earlier series, long before Bolo.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the Paratime organization, it seems like you get into the Superman trap with that sort of deal where you're just, once you have the ability to predictably jump between worlds, you just have such a large advantage over any possible adversary that you stop being able to tell interesting stories. It's like Marty McFly has to run out of gas for his time machine, otherwise he can solve all of his problems with more time travel.
Unless you're dealing with the butterfly effect, and then you have the fact that no amount of time travel will ever fix your problem because you've already caused the problem in the first place.
Yeah.
Right.
There's an interesting German sci-fi show on Netflix, Dark. I don't know if you guys have seen it.
I watched the first season, and then the second season came out like a year later, and I realized I just couldn't keep up with it. I really have to. Now it's completed with 3. I'll sit down and watch it all so I don't get lost again.
Right. If you are into, if you're really particular about time traveling and you really like having things like, they make sense and the ending makes sense and everything. Like, it's one of those shows that handle time traveling right, which is pretty rare, right? Most of the time you're like, okay, whatever. The Avengers figured it out somehow. It just worked out. Okay, it's fine. You just accept it. Dark is they went through the trouble of unraveling the mystery of that. But yeah, I think watching Dark, you need like a board of all the characters and then connect how they're related to each other. That's basically like you go insane, like, wait, so this person is the daughter of this dude that married yeah.
Yeah, it gets a little
but it's very trippy, and it's interesting if you like time traveling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the other time travel series that is like that was oh shoot, now I'm not coming up with this name. Leo Frankowski had one where the book is basically a circle. And what happens is that these 3 guys are adopted out in the 50s. And they meet in college, and they all have the exact same birthday. And so, they, because of that, they get to know each other, and they, work together, and they do various other things. One is more of an engineer, one is more of a marketing guy, and I don't remember the third. But, they grow up and eventually sort of invent time travel. Except then, because they are working with time travel and screwing things up, time travelers from the future come and teach them how to do it right. Except that, of course, the time travelers from the future who are teaching them to do it right are only coming because they started it in the first place, and the stuff that is right is because they had it, because the time travelers gave it to them. And I mean, it's just this big ball of spaghetti as far as a plot because of the time travel. But it turns out that one of them is the father of all three of them. So it's weird stuff. But
Yeah.
again,
Getting into
a lot
all
of
your
science.
zombies territory there.
Yep, a lot of science fiction goes there. But paratime is a different situation because you're not traveling, forward or backward in time, but sideways to another universe.
Yeah.
And another great series with that is Richard C. Meredith's No Brother, No Friend series. I think he actually, it's actually referred to as something else, but I think the first book is No Brother, No Friend.
Well, I do recall James P. Hogan doing, it was just a one-off where people basically are, the government has this program where they're spying into extra dimensions that are very similar to their own. And basically when you're sent by them via the machine, you go and possess a body on the other side. And things start happening because other dimensions are doing it to them as well. So it kind of gets complicated. But
Right.
It's like the Cold War is happening and people are doing stuff. And eventually one group of people, they go to a different dimension, and basically World War I ends in 1916 in a settlement. And they start using basically making deals with their other selves on that side to do that. And of course they find one dimension, I mean, where Hitler won the war. They're like, well, the one character is in that dimension. She's like, what's the first thing you do when you get to the extra dimension? You pull out the encyclopedia to figure out what's going on. And she's like reading the history of it was like FDR signed up with Hitler and the British guy who's not Churchill, and they wipe out the Russians. And she comes back and says, I don't think we want to go back to that dimension ever. Just cross that one off the list.
My
Definitely.
brother Sam has a theory that anytime we travel through time, one, there are Zeppelins, and two, the Nazis won the war. And it doesn't matter if we travel from 1970 to 1990. That means the Nazis won the war.
Yeah.
Did you read my latest, Hank?
Nope, still ignoring it.
Still ignoring it. Okay. Because that's one of the things that I just posted something today on Ricochet that it's called Displacement. It's the first in what will be a serial novel that I'll be posting out there, first chapter. But one of the guys has invented a way to displace himself through various dimensions, including time.
Okay.
And goes back to find out who killed someone and accidentally is the killer. So he's talking about this with a police detective, and the detective says, no, you don't want to pursue this. Just get rid of it. Find something else to do, because sooner or later some jerk is going to give Hitler the plans for the H-bomb or something in 1933.
Mhm.
So, it always comes back to that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, lost causes are very popular among science fiction writers, though. No one seems to ever think that Darius should actually cross over to Greece and end Western civilization at the source. Everyone just seems to want to go. Sometimes you get Turtle Dove rewriting, sending South African warlords back to the Civil War to make sure that the Gettysburg goes right.
Guns of the South. I just
Yeah.
read that one last year. Couldn't print it today. Too many N-words.
Yeah, right.
Put it
I mean, it's
mildly.
perfectly context appropriate and appropriate to the characters and the time frame, but couldn't print it today. Too many N-words.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think
Doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Not now.
another one like that, actually much older, is Come the Jubilee, which was one where the South had won and the North had kind of gone into an introspective decline after that. And the only thing happening in the North was that this one company was fooling around with time travel. And so this guy who had been hired on as a historian wants to go see, what happened where the South had gotten a hold of Little Round Top and how they had won the Battle of Gettysburg. And he accidentally, he goes back in time and then accidentally frightens off the troops who were going to take Little Round Top. And instead, the North takes it. So then the North wins the Battle of Gettysburg. And, he's stuck back there in time because time travel has never been invented since the North had won instead of the South. And, it just goes on like that. But it's probably from the 50s, from the Jubilee.
I haven't read it, but I know of it. Yeah, there's something similar. What was I thinking about?
Yeah, it actually reminds me of an H.B. Piper story, one about Crossroads of History, I think it was called.
Yes, yes. That was the one where I think something had, I know what it was. George Washington had been shot at the Battle of Germantown. And so the person who became the general who won the war and the first president was good old Benedict Arnold V.
Good story. Did you figure out what you were thinking of there a moment ago?
No, not really, but I was just thinking about, I did go back to another one. Have you ever read there's a science fiction anthology called Alternate Presidents? And throughout the book, it has basically every president has the other guy wins. And some of them, the ones around the Civil War get interesting. I mean, there's one where the South wins. It's the North that succeeds from the South. And they use slave power to win. And I'm like, I think this one's a bit far-fetched. Another one has Dukakis wins the election, but they take him to Area 51 to show him what's really going on with all the aliens. And turns out Dukakis was an alien the entire time. So they have to use time travel to go back and make sure H.W. Bush wins. Even though they're like, yeah, he's going to cause that war in like Iraq, but we'll have to deal with that when that happens.
All I can say is that it would explain a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember that particular story in that. The whole series was edited by Mike Resnick.
Right.
And, they had alternate Kennedys, I think, alternate presidents, alternate this, that, and the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm not sure whether it was alternate presidents or alternate Kennedys. There was a great story called Winterberry, which was basically the idea that John Kennedy had just been brain damaged. And so they hid the fact that he continued to live. Mm. And so he was being taken care of by, various family members, and, it went on from there. But
yeah, I think that must have been alternate Kennedys, though. I do recall another one of the stories in Alternate Presidents where Nixon loses the election and then becomes like some sort of game show host, where he's running this show called like Tricky Dick, and people come on and they got to figure out whether or not he's lying or not.
Oh, that sounds good.
That's easy. Just lean on the yes key and you're done.
Yeah.
Like an episode of Futurama or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I guess it was also in the alternate Kennedys where there was a story that when Jack Kennedy became president, a leprechaun appeared because, of course, he was Irish. So a leprechaun appeared and started helping do things, but you had to be very careful what you said, because, if you said, well, gee, I'd like this room green, everything would be green, or whatever. So you had to be careful how you phrased what you said to the leprechaun. But anyway, then Dick Nixon paid for the speechwriters to have Kennedy say, "Ich bin ein Berliner." And so he was sent home in a donut box.
Another one in that story has the kingfish become president.
Yes.
And that one's like he invites Hitler over for like he's not going to win the next election. He kind of bamboozled his way into like taking out FDR at the nomination and becomes president. But he's like, I don't. He starts looking at the poll numbers and he's like, goes to his vice president and he's like, I don't think we're going to pull this one off. So he invites Hitler to come visit the United States, and Hitler's driving through the streets of Harlem, and then suddenly he has Hitler assassinated so they could have a war so he can get himself reelected.
Wow.
Yeah.
There are a lot of very good authors out there who come up with very interesting ideas and things, especially when you're going to parallel history or alternate history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, the king of them all is Harry Turtledove with his aliens invade Earth during World War II.
Yeah. Well, he actually had quite a few before that with his, I think it was Remian Empire series or something like that. You know, where it was Remus rather than Romulus who got to name the city.
Yeah, Christopher Stasheff did that in his one series, just that the city was named Ream, and that's all you got. It's like, okay, that's nice. Touch of alternate history in the other dimension there.
Yeah. Well, Stasheff, of course, was mostly fantasy.
Yeah, it was definitely
Sort
a fantasy
of.
book.
Yeah, but well, you know, it's kind of on the border between, in a sense that the warlock, in spite of himself, is actually coming to a planet settled by people with a high level of psychic abilities.
Right.
So
This was his other one. I forget what it was called now, but they did eventually cross over with the Warlock in spite of himself, that series. So I don't know how you count that.
Well, speaking of other things, what do we think about the actual aliens the government says are buzzing our missile bases?
I'm sorry, I missed part of that.
Yeah, I missed half of that.
You guys know that the government has officially announced that these UFOs that were flying, that we always thought on X-Files weren't real, are real, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Apparently, they like to buzz around missile bases and turn nuclear weapons on and off.
Okay, I didn't
I
hear
hadn't
about
heard
the
that
nuclear
part.
weapon.
Yeah, it was like I was listening to the interview with the guy who's like he has some sort of alien show on history, but he used to be actually the commander of the American like research group into the aliens. So he says most of the stuff I can't tell you is still classified, so I can't go into the details, but some of the stuff is declassified, and they're coming out with more on the report event that's coming out this year, I believe. And he's just like, look, someone was being interviewed on one of the Ricochet programs, and he was like saying, so what happens when the woman's like, so these aliens are just like buzzing around our aircraft for fun, right? And he's like, nope, they go over our missile bases and they turn the nuclear missiles on and off. And they do the same to the Russians. And I'm like, great.
Sounds like
what is there to say about something like that?
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. The only thing I can think of is, do we think they're actually UFOs, or are they maybe ultra-terrestrials?
I don't know, but it sounds like college kids doing a prank.
Yeah.
Yeah. Neither.
Yeah, college kids doing a prank was a plot point in one of the Hitchhiker's Guide series. There's apparently teasers who had come down and beep and boop in front of yokels that no one will believe just because it's fun.
Yeah. I know that I read the synopsis for Stephen King's novel, Under the Dome. And apparently it is teenagers having fun.
I would definitely believe that.
Yeah. And of course, there's always the movie Voyager, I believe it is, where the kids all put together a spaceship in their backyard and use it to go visit the aliens up in the sky. And they finally, they get there and they discover, oh, they're just alien teenagers as well.
And we're losing a lot of what you're saying, Dave.
Oh, sorry. It's probably a bad connection on my end. Yep, my internet connection is unstable.
Well, so am I.
I think it was the aliens coming through and
Yeah, they were turning it on and
destabilizing,
off.
knowing what you were going to talk about.
Yeah.
How many nukes do you have in your basement?
Not enough. Not enough.
I mean, just judging by that room behind you.
Yeah, this is from that stupid space game that the guy who made the Wing Commander video game series. He's tried to start his like Star Citizen, which has turned into the biggest boondoggle in computer gaming history scam, where it's basically almost like a multiple level marketing system where they keep trying to sell people to buy new spaceships every month. And I know people who spent like thousands of dollars in this game, and the game has not gone started.
Right.
It's like,
Wow.
Yeah.
I do not know that story, but I would be interested in hearing it.
Yeah,
Possibly
it's
not on
they've
topic
spent like
for this.
$300 million so far in developing this like universe.
Wow.
And it's still in development. And they did the original Kickstarter in like 2013. It's 8 years later.
Yeah, it's like one of those cases where, like, can it even come out at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I bought my $50 into it. I wanted to play because the guy did Wing Commander. I thought we would get the Wing Commander game he was going to make. So it was just, but now, no, he's just like continuing to like say, give me a little bit more time, And I was disconnected from the newsletters and all these other things. There have been channels developed just to criticize the scam. It's been pretty intense.
It's got to be something impressive to knock Duke Nukem Forever off of that throne.
Yeah. You have like conventions every year. People fly out to like wherever it is to go to it. It's been just one of those insane stories out there.
Yeah. It's like what? Yeah. I don't. It's a very successful scheme.
Yep. I don't think they intended to do it. I think they intended originally to do a video game, and this just kind of like a lot of corporations get into this kind of trap where we have to keep making this is easier than actually working.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the declassified UFO stories, have there been actual like a scientific community reaction to this? Like an official one? Because I mean, I've read like random stuff, but I can tell you that most people I know in physics just like laugh it off.
Apparently, they can now explain through physics how these alien ships can do it theoretically, but haven't figured out how to actually do it mechanically yet. Like they figured out the physics for it, and they're like, okay, well, I'm like, I guess inertial dampeners must be a thing.
Cool.
And I'm always wondering if it's not necessarily aliens, but like Atlantis, basically, a precursor civilization that is still stuck here and like screwing around with us instead of like.
And they haven't gotten out much since the whole city sunk, and since they've basically been in for a couple millennia of quarantine. Why not mess with everyone else?
So, if you guys were writing a science fiction book, what kind of story would you be writing?
Well, I just this morning tried to put down a bit of a man talks with AI story, but that got about 2 whole paragraphs in, and it's sort of sitting there now. So, if is a pretty strong condition on that.
Probably a first contact. kind of novel. But I mean, I haven't thought about it. It's just whenever I see very different ways of telling the first contact, it's always really intriguing.
I already wrote my first contact novella. Arahant has been beta reading it for months now.
And yeah, no. So you're on your second contact novel now?
Yeah, I guess. No, I always had this idea. If you guys ever see that DS9 episode where the kids are running the starship, like they're the academy grads, all the adults got killed off, and the academy grads are running it, and that was a combination of Heartbreak Ridge, where at the beginning of the movie, the Major says to Clint Eastwood's character, "You're like we should just keep you locked up in a glass case and break the glass with a sign that says break glass in case of war." So that was kind of my science fiction novella, is based on that kind of idea, where this guy is living out in the middle of the woods, and suddenly people show up to drag him back off to take care of the crisis, and things go in interesting directions from there, and eventually leads to like a first contact civilized situation with an alien species. So that was my novella, which is in first draft, but when I get mine, like I said earlier, I'm about 13,000 words about to complete my novel, and then I'll go back to the novella and write the second draft.
What's the novel?
It's basically wizards in World War I. So
Cool.
Throughout history, basically, the wizards don't know this, but basically for every 1 out of every million people born, they're going to have magic powers. But it's not like hereditary. It's just basically every 1 million people, one of them will have magic powers. So if you're out in the middle of the wilderness and like in some village somewhere, you might get your magic powers, never meet another wizard, and eventually like die, leaving some of your records behind, but only another wizard who might come along centuries later, finding your old books, like the Voynich manuscript I mentioned in the book, where the Voynich, someone's like, "Yeah, we found this book. I just came back from looking at it. It turns out it's just like a research notebook. It's not that very valuable, but no one, only if you're only wizard can read it, right?"
Sure.
But basically, but when we start building human city civilizations, you have enough critical mass to create like a long-standing tradition of the wizards can start finding each other, and that happens. So the 3 big colleges, or 4 in the world, are by World War I. There's one called the College in Rome, based on the Roman Empire. There's one in Constantinople, which is of course starts Christian or Western, but then gets occupied by the Turks. There's one in Qom for Persia, and there's another in Shanghai in China.
Those Turks always occupying things.
Yeah.
So basically, yeah. So the main point of view character is most people are born wizards or develop the power when they're like 5 or 6 years old. And this guy is actually the main point of view character, is a soldier fighting in France with the Canadian forces, and he develops it during the middle of the battle. And it's not unheard of, but like one of the characters said, "Yeah, I encountered like someone like you 20 years ago." So another thing is like I start thinking through the logic of what all this means. So turns out a lot of the traveling magicians are actually real world wizards in this world, whose job is to go out to tour around and find other wizard children. Because naturally, the most people curious to come to these shows are often the kids who want to go to the show because they want to see real magic. And then, of course, another mage can tell another mage, unless they're specifically hiding their abilities.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is.
And so basically, there's more like they're just developing like the First World War. It starts in 1915, so the First World War is happening, and it's the first time there's really a chance for a real wizard war, because there's just enough people in the world and enough division going on. There has never been before you might have one wizard working for a king somewhere and another wizard working for the other king, and they're having a fight. But there's never been enough hundreds of wizards on one side and hundreds of wizards on the other side, and they have a kind of a masquerade. They don't want to reveal themselves because they're worried that mainly they'll be exploited. That's their kind of thing.
Right. And then in World War II, you get to bedknobs and broomsticks.
Yeah, basically. They don't have super mega powers. They're not they're pretty cool, but they're low grade superhero wizardry versus I can destroy a city with my powers level. One guy has the ability to turn into a shadow and become and he possesses the shadow of a tree to kill another evil wizard once. And
you read the Hard Magic series, Larry Correia?
Yes, I read the first one.
Wizards in World War I.
Yeah. But basically, my idea for this is that wizards don't have. I'm using the backdrop of real world history, and the wizards will make that history happen as it happened historically, or really humans have that. I'm not going to no one's going to ever break out their magic powers in front of to derail events. They might be thinking that's what they're doing. One of the main bad guys in the story is convinced that he has to have Germany win World War I because he's a seer and he sees what happens in the future. And he's like, if Germany doesn't win World War I, World War II is going to happen and all hell is going to break loose.
Well, just make sure it doesn't go down the J.K. Rowling World War II story that she's trying to do with Crimes of Grindelwald. That story just she has established her world for obviously a while. You know who Grindelwald is if you read the series, kind of thing. And then, she goes back to the 20s, it's going to lead up to the Second World War. And essentially, Grindelwald has visions of the future. And he's look at these humans and look at what they're detonated in 45 and how destructive they can be. So we, the more sophisticated wizarding, community should actually take over the world to protect the world from them, kind of thing. That's what she's going down. Is it when I was watching that movie, I was like, oh no, don't do that. Don't do that. But she's definitely doing that.
Yeah.
Well, we also know what happens already, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
My guys are just not that cool. I mean, they're pretty cool. I wouldn't mind having their abilities, like the ability to teleport or travel very fast or something, but they're just not as cool as they could be.
Wait, you don't have the ability to teleport?
Yeah,
I thought everyone did.
I'm just using it. I mainly want to explore social issues, and I'm using the First World War to do it. And I'm also a published military historian, and I've been in magazines for my stuff, nonfiction stuff. And it just seems like I started off with I have a lot of stuff in World War II, but I'm World War I's kind of interesting. There's all this crazy stuff happening, and no one seems to be really tying into it. There's 100 books on wizards in World War II, but who writes about World War I? And I mean, you got going to have Turkey and all the stuff happening there, the Greco Civil War, all these things that will happen after the war even. So I'm much more happy just to playing around in a world where no one's really paying any attention to it.
To answer your question, Richard C. Meredith.
What about him?
The Timeliner series that I mentioned earlier, the main character starts out as a soldier in World War I, except that it's in the 1970s because it's been going on that long.
Well, there's always that fantasy series which has magic in World War I-ish. The magic's discovered in the 18th century and is formally developed, and none of the old empires it's basically the Plantagenets never fall for England. Lord Darcy, I believe, is the series.
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
Lord Darcy Investigates, things like that. There's actually a pair of writers, I think, writing under the name Randall Garrett.
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't know about the pair writers, but I definitely that I have had that book for over 20 years and I've never read it. I've only read one story that I read in an anthology series, which was kind of a prequel.
Okay, I'm wrong.
Hmm.
Randall Garrett was actually Gordon Randall Philip David Garrett.
Oh wow. So why don't we this thing's starting to drag on a little bit, so why don't we all end up on like a favorite author we should all recommend to each other. And I'll go with my favorite author, and I recommend is of course Jerry Purnell, who is writes the thing I most like about him is that he gets you to think about political consequences. So he's kind of a was a conservative thinker. He was tied into the Reagan Revolution. Apparently, he later heard there was a rumor that he was going to be appointed to the head of NASA, and NASA heard this, and administrators were threatening to throw themselves out of the top of stories of buildings at the NASA because they were afraid that this guy was going to be the head of NASA. He wrote
that would have done a lot of good.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Yeah. He wrote he worked with Larry Niven, and they have a series of different books, but one of the two big books that they wrote together are Footfall and what's the other one?
Mote in God's Eye.
Mote in God's Eye, of course.
It's also the other Hammer one. Is it Lucifer's Hammer?
Yeah, Lucifer's Hammer.
Yeah.
And of course, I was thinking of the one where they're all in the arcology. But these books are very good. If you ever if someone says, I want to read some, you name a good conservative science fiction writer that isn't Heinlein, I would really recommend Purnell, because his stories are like, he's writing his intellectual philosophy into these books. So a lot of times you can see what's going on in the background via his ideas.
And he was heavily influenced by H. Bean Piper.
As well.
A couple of years back, Randy Wyvida was good enough to organize a Ricochet meetup around Worldcon in Kansas. And I got to see Jerry Purnell and Larry Niven on various panels there, which was neat. I did not stand in line to get a signature or anything, though.
I'm actually a friend of one of his sons. So, well, convention buddy of one of his sons.
I'll count it.
Yeah. So what about you, Hank? Who do you think who would you recommend to the rest of the panel?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm gonna pass for now. I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Are we talking about just sci-fi?
Yeah, just sci-fi. Any sci-fi you would recommend for anyone else here to read?
It just seems like this is the crowd that has already read books from, all the relevant writers.
Well, one that didn't come up at all. Have you read William Gibson, Neuromancer, those books?
Yeah. Why do you think?
Yeah.
Why do you like William Gibson?
Mostly it's a style thing, honestly. He also does pretty good gadgets. I don't think he actually knows all that much about the stuff that he's talking about. So he's unencumbered by knowing what's possible and what isn't when he designs things that would be cool. But he does really excellent style. Like the punk aspect of cyberpunk is pretty much entirely due to his invention.
Yeah, the resurgence of cyberpunk with like Cyberpunk 2077, for instance. You look at these things, you're like, dude, Neuromancer has been around for how long? Like everything is just like a derivative of it, right?
Yeah, well, except for Blade Runner, apparently.
Yeah. So you know how there's never been like an actual adaptation of Neuromancer into a movie? And I heard I guess it's now like gonna happen, but now it's gonna suffer from that problem where people will watch it and think it's a derivative of all these other movies they've seen over the past 20, 30 years, even though it's the other way around. It's kind of like, I think Dune might have that problem too, right? Where younger audiences or people who aren't aware of it are gonna think it's just like a derivative of other Messiah things, but you know. Anyway, I think probably Dan Simmons, mainly because he does sci-fi really well, but he also writes like historical fiction well and just mythological things well. He's just like overall a great writer. He's definitely diverse in the topics he talks about.
Okay, cool.
I think I would recommend going back to the roots a bit more.
Of course.
And some writers, they aren't necessarily science fiction, but they influenced it, and they influenced the whole science fiction, fantasy, gothic, you know, which all kind of spin together. It's like, was talking of gothic, Fred Saberhagen was basically known as a science fiction writer, but he did a lot of stuff with Dracula. Well, where does Dracula come from? You go back to the Gothic. So a couple that I think of, one would be James Branch Cabell, which distant cousin of mine, but very distant.
Of course.
We're both descended from the Branches, which is one of the first families of Virginia. But anyway, James Branch Cabell wrote kind of a, I guess you'd call it a fantasy series years and years ago, although some parts of it were a bit gothic, and there's so much there. And it influenced other science fiction writers who came in what we consider the golden age, people like H. Beam Piper. So another thing, going even further back, Horace Walpole's Castle of Atranto. Have any of you ever read it?
No.
No,
It's
but
considered-
it sounds like it familiar.
Yeah, it's considered the first Gothic novel. And you can get it places like Project Gutenberg for free.
Sure.
So it's well worth looking at that, you know, again, going back to the roots. And again, one of the first, well, not, I mean, gotta qualify that, but one of the first science fiction stories in English, one of the first big ones was, of course, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So that would be another good one to pass back to.
Okay. Well, it's been great talking to y'all, meeting y'all, and I hope you all, I know Erhan's already seen some of our shows, but if you guys ever want to go back and see, we already did one sci-fi panel, and we've done other shows just interviewing other members. Maybe we'll have a chance to, me and Don will sit down with one of you guys in the future.
One more question for Leidens.
Sorry, what was that?
Who's your furry friend who was behind you for quite a while?
Oh, Chaz?
Mhm.
Yep, he's my husky. It's one of the reasons why I was like, I can go to like 4-ish, because then he gets like restless and I gotta take him out. And, you know, run for a while because he's a husky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. And now that we've got Can We See the Dog, I've got Bingo on my Zoom card.
What?
Not familiar with that gag?
Oh yeah. No.
Standard Zoom meeting trivia. One of the spots in the bingo card is Can We See the Dog?
Ah, okay.
Yeah, he'll be really quiet most of the day, but usually it's when I'm actually talking in a meeting at work is when he decides to bark at the dogs that are outside. You know how
Okay.
it is.
Yeah, my friend had in high school, he had 2 huskies, and one was the female, and she was like ooh all the time, and the male one would almost never bark. And I remember one time my friend, someone's like, hey, there's some dog running outside, and I'm like, oh crap, that's the dogs. So my friends are at school as mothers at work, so I bring, but I knew where the grandparents were, so I brought the female dog home, and I'm like, I have no idea where your other male dogs run off to. And then my friend gets home later, and the male dog's still sleeping on the couch. The female one made a break for it, but the other one's like, well, I can't be bothered to leave here. Okay, well, with that pleasant dog story, I think we can end it here, and I'll see you guys in the comments on Ricochet.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay,
Thanks.
see y'all later.
Okay, bye.